training I went through. In a definition and a rule. Or it be fine. And I couldn't find my notes or literature on that training. I understand. The need for clarity. Here we need to get.
It's in their guidelines.
Produce water.
Okay. All right, Commissioner McWilliams, I understand you have another question of the panel.
Yes, sorry. I thought of another question after Commissioner Dominguez questioning, and I just wanted to ask one quick question. I know the Produced Water Act was enacted in 2019, which was 5 years ago. And I was wondering if a company or a university were to do a demonstration project that provided a level of comfort, a full characterization of the source fluid and a full characterization of the effluent created. How long do you guys anticipate would it take for one of those demonstration projects to become actual, promulgate rules for it and be able to use for discharge? We think it'd be another 5 years, or any idea on what would we expect to be a result of one of those successful demonstration projects?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner McWilliams. I do want to clarify that a single demonstration project, as based on Ms. Murphy and Dr. Hu's testimony, is unlikely to be comprehensive enough to characterize the water in the Permian Basin sufficiently to know what the constituents are, all the treatment processes that would have to be undertaken, and what the consistent effluent quality could be. And so I will reiterate that we need many demonstration projects, and the extent that entities are willing to test and explore that, we want to encourage. We also don't want to be prescriptive to the point in which we are hindering any innovation or treatment methodologies that we don't have the answers. And so part of this rule in that NOI process with the demonstration projects is to bring in a considerable amount of information of the various types of treatments and what they can remove and what's in the characterization. As far as the rulemaking process goes, as I've said, this is my 7th rulemaking that I've participated in. And in general, a rulemaking should be expected from the time we have a good idea of what the language in the rule, what we're aiming for. It can take up to 4 to 6 years. And because there is an extensive amount of work that goes into the drafting, into the advisory committees, which is critical for these particular rules in reuse, and then the stakeholder outreach, tribal outreach, public outreach, and then having the time for all interested parties to read, review, and provide testimony, it adds up. So a rulemaking process is not something that can be done in a year, 2 years, as we've been working very actively on this particular rule, was still fairly expedited. And so I would say that when we got to that point, the rulemaking process in and of itself would take 4 to 6 years.
Okay, that's helpful. How many demonstration projects would be, required in order to prove a technology?
Thank you, Commissioner. I believe, and I know that you're thinking of the San Juan Basin, and that is a vastly different water than the Delaware Basin. And so, again, we have a best available technology for sampling and analysis, and that's from the consortium. And we just need people to begin. We have so little data. And so it could be that it's water, the produced water is thoroughly characterized in in the San Juan Basin before the Delaware Basin, but we just need projects to begin and give us a level of comfort. And we'll probably need hundreds of samples.
If
Okay.
I could maybe try to get a little bit closer to the core of your
Yeah, hold on
question.
just
Sure,
one
sorry.
second. Just to clarify, I actually don't think it's applicable in the San Juan Basin. We produce such little amounts of produced water. I don't think that this Produced Water Act and the subsequent rules really will apply to the San Juan Basin. So this is more just for the rule itself, not
Okay.
my questioning. It's not related to the San Juan Basin. Now go ahead, Mr. Herman.
Sorry. I think the core of your question is how much work needs to be done before we have enough information. And it's difficult to pinpoint a number, but if someone were to do a comprehensive study in the Permian Basin or in the Delaware Basin, where they took 1,000 samples from 1,000 different wells and tested all of them on different technologies and did it all monochromatically across the board, it could be that one study. There's not really a finish line that we have in mind at this time. And to get back to Ms. Fulham's response, we've done a lot of the front end work on the produced water rule by doing this, and we have a lot of the chess pieces in place. We have staff that are onboarded that are specific to produced water. And I think I may be more optimistic than Ms. Fulham. I know we have right now we are working on IPR and DPR regulations concurrently as we're going through this process. I don't sleep very much at this point as a result of those things, and I think that there's some concurrent efforts that are going on right now that would also benefit future rulemaking processes. And since 2019, we've been anticipating the arrival of large quantities of data. And we're in the position that we're in now with the rule that we're proposing as a result of that lack of arrival of that data and information.
Thank you.
Is that all, Commissioner McWilliams? All right, Commissioner Fry?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. And I want to thank all of you for, it's obvious you've put in a lot of time into these rules and into your testimony. And I'm very grateful for all the material you're providing us. And I want to thank Commissioner McWilliams for feeding right into my questions. So she kind of got at, the process, how long, for me, it's the timing in this question. And she got at the question of how long we might get to a place where technology can be approved for this application. The other element of that is what's the timeline for establishing standards that these applications can be measured against?
Commissioner Fry, I will start off and probably hand off so everybody can provide a little bit more input. As far as the Water Quality Act, and as a scientist, in order to develop standards, the Water Quality Act requires us to have scientifically defensible data in which those standards are applied on. And when we're talking about standards, we're talking about the protection of human health as it pertains to ground and surface water. And so there has to be sufficient information that's defensible, that has the quality assurance mechanisms to ensure that bias is reduced, there's repeatability. These are called data quality indicators. And in order to establish those data quality indicators to a level that's robust enough in order to implement or propose a particular water quality standard for a toxic pollutant or a constituent of concern that could cause harm to human health, we have to understand first the toxicology to understand the contaminants, and we have to be able to defend that. The concern that we have with produced water at this point is that there are a lot of unknown constituents. Some may be harmful, some may not, some may be benign, but without knowing, it is difficult to say that it would be protective. And so the volume and the amount of information that is needed in order to develop particular standards particular to the constituents in produced water may take some time. And again, this rule is not to be overly prescriptive. It's almost like a ability to call for data so that it can support this. And we have worked with the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium for the past 5 years now in order to try and facilitate these types of demonstration projects. At this point, and as you can see on our website that has all of the demonstration projects that have been conducted as we know them in the state of New Mexico, there is exceptionally limited data. And this rule is to help facilitate the submission of that data to NMED to make the determination that it would be scientifically defensible and therefore mature enough to bring before the commission. So I don't have a date or a number because scientifically defensible is dependent on the rigor and what your end goal is.
Okay. So a decade, 2 decades?
I would hope not. We've really worked with the consortium to help this process along. Part of the problem is getting that information back out. And what does that information do? What is it telling us? A lot of these demonstration projects only look at a portion of either a treatment process or the impacts to plants, you know. And so this is really to help the department and the state and citizens be able to have some reliability that these research projects are actually producing data. And we believe that all our work over the past 5 years has led us to knowing what those gaps are and why this language is important to fill those gaps while still protecting ground and surface water by preventing discharges. So this is trying to strike that happy balance between what we're going to need to develop standards to be protective while at the same time protecting the limited water we already have. Didn't give you a direct answer.
All right, thank you. So I'll dive into the whole NOI questions. So clearly we're seeing a lot of strong public reaction. So with that in mind, how stringent is the NMED review of notice of intents, and what amount of follow-up is, I mean, I know it's not gonna be like permits, so you don't probably have a really good schedule, but I'm just, wondering about how the assurance goes that the project's not gonna introduce more problems than it's trying to address.
Thank you for the question. I think it might be helpful for me to walk you through how we've processed NOIs currently. With the submission of a notice of intent for a produced water project, Kathleen will receive it and notify the team, her management chain, Jen, and then me. And if there's a surface water component, we'll include Surface Water Quality Bureau. And we'll meet and review. So we'll all review the notice of intent, and then we'll meet together to discuss any issues that we've identified with it. Oftentimes, we will meet with the submitter multiple times to discuss issues that we have determined to be problematic, or essentially issues that would require a discharge permit and therefore would not be allowed. It usually takes a couple of weeks for us to get to that first contact point with the regulated community or with the entity. And then if need be, we will respond to them formally with a letter stating that we cannot go forward until they provide us with this updated information. A lot of times in these processes, we have discussed secondary containment. We've discussed their process definitions, the missing information, the lack of information, the lack of clarity, or the lack of specificity in their plans or in their actual submission, and then we'll await a subsequent submission from them, a revised notice of intent. One of the things that we have been stringent on is that the notice of intent must be notarized to ensure that they're not just submitting us a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo or empty promises. At that point, when we respond to them with a notice of with a discharge permit not required letter, that is our hands-off point. We still retain under the Water Quality Act the authority to inspect any facility that we choose to, and we can follow up if we are provided any information or if we suspect any deviation. And our no discharge permit required letter specifically states that if they are not doing the project in the manner in which they submitted the notice of intent in, that they are subject to enforcement under the Water Quality Act. And that we will absolutely enforce upon them for that.
That's perfect. Thank you. How much back and forth would be common on one of these?
There is a fair amount of back and forth, and we've requested additional information, and sometimes it takes a couple weeks to respond, and sometimes they request another meeting and we explain. So we have actually had meetings, it seems like, with most of the people. So there is a fair amount of interaction.
Okay. So a couple of the community commenters mentioned how their communities were affected by testing in the past. How much consideration is given to reviewing these?
Thanks for the question. I'm not aware of any projects that we have processed a notice of intent for that has resulted in any negative effects on communities, mostly because none of those projects have actually gone forward. Prior to the notice of intent process, there was some confusion, some misinformation in northwestern New Mexico at a site that we did investigate with OCD, with the Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources Department. There was a report that treated produced water had been discharged to the ground surface for growing plants. We accompanied I think it was me and Kathleen went up to the site with OCD staff. They pulled samples of the soil, tested the samples, and it was determined that no discharge of treated produced water had occurred. And that is my understanding that is the only instance where a potentially questionable action had occurred outside of OCD's jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, I think one of the commenters was not commenting on produced water, but maybe some other testing. So, okay, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, let's see here. So within requirements for NOIs, let me see here. There was reference to health. I think it was regarding health and safety, and I'm sorry I don't have it right in front of me. Oh yeah. It's number 10 under C1A. The health and safety considerations that minimize the risk of human exposure to produced water via any exposure pathway, which I'm assuming refers to a lab bench or, well, to any of the demonstrations to the workers on that project. And I'm just wondering if it would be useful to be more specific to include, SOPs and specifically state the kind of documentation they might want to have on those.
Commissioner Fry, I think I can help answer that. In the requirements in the notices of intent, there are a couple of areas in which we refer or punt to other entities that would have the regulatory authority. And so it wasn't for trying to be ambiguous, but it may be above and beyond the Water Quality Act specifically to cite out. And I am not an expert in DOT, I'm not an expert in OSHA. So in essence, we want the entities conducting these demonstration projects to be transparent about their plans. We can respond as far as whether or not there is no discharge and therefore not subject to permitting. But we could not provide, we went back and forth when we were drafting this rule numerous times, and adding more specificity could imply that the other applicable rules that we aren't aware of wouldn't apply. And so we purposefully left the language regarding other state and federal regulations and the health and safety general, because under the act, we didn't have the authority, and I didn't want to overspeak or underspeak as to who might.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I knew my question was a little off.
It's a good question though, because it dabbles on the outskirts of things.
Right, right. So, let me see here. Oh yeah, how much follow-up then could there potentially be on the project? So you mentioned if there's concerns that, there would be a release or anything like that. How much follow-up actually happens besides the requirement for what they give you at the end of the project?
We thank you for the question. The department, I don't want to say the department, the Groundwater Quality Bureau's implementation of regulations is heavily reliant upon self-reporting as well as citizen reporting. And we do often, that is our only sources of information beyond monitoring reports for permits. So I would anticipate that we would generally not follow up unless we had a reason to. Just the honest answer.
Yeah. Okay. All right, that's helpful. All right, so let's I think I'm almost done here, and I want to move past the NOI questions. So in let's see, so 20.6.8.400 A 1 through 4. Each one of those 1 through 4 gives 2 sentences that seem to be repeated in each one. And then in 4, when you're talking about treated produced water discharge to groundwater, you have additional language about where you're adding a clause without development and adoption of standards, and then there's a few more sentences. Why specifically that one, and why not the other 3?
Thank you for thank you for the question, Commissioner Fry. The dance that's occurring in those 4 sections is the federal state regulatory world that we're living within currently. We have a state discharge permitting program, and we have confidence in saying that we can that in the future we will have a state permitting program for groundwater discharge permits. And so this is keeping our statements and our regulations within the known realm of regulatory authorities. Did that answer your question?
Let me see if I get what you're saying. So, number 4 relates to groundwater. Number 3 relates to groundwater. And 1 and 2 to surface water. So you're saying there's already regulations in place, whereas for groundwater, there's not?
Actually,
Sorry.
the opposite of that.
Yeah, okay.
So the currently the state does not have primacy over surface water discharges, and therefore we left those caveats out of the surface water delineations. I'm trying to not step
I
on your
can-
toes here.
I
Sorry.
could
Let me switch off and just address, so Madam Hearing Officer, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Fry, for the surface water, the reason we have the prohibition is, as Mr. Herman stated, we do not have primacy under the Clean Water Act. And so we have to do 401 certifications of MPDS permits, which are issued by EPA. And so the prohibition there is to allow a denial and to provide the Surface Water Quality Bureau, when we write our 401 certifications, to have something in statute that supports that denial. Because in a 401 certification, I have to have a regulatory, the department has to have a regulatory basis for any condition or any denial. And so that's why there's a difference between surface water and groundwater, because surface water, it's all federal Clean Water Act.
And so right now for groundwater, everything's in house and we have control and we have the powers associated with it. For surface waters, a portion of it is definitely still in house, a portion of it's not in house, and that may change in the near to long-term future. And therefore it was necessary for us to not to treat them differently, essentially.
And can I, of course, add to that too? The structure of the rule. This has been something that was discussed in the advisory committee. It's been discussed internally among us. There are 4 subsections, and 2 are for untreated produced water, 1 for surface, 1 for ground. The other are for treated produced water, 1 for surface water, 1 for ground. In addition to the 2 regulatory federal and state delineations, that was important to keep separate. We also kept it separate, so we could have just put, we were asked to consider untreated produced water as a whole for ground and surface water. That poses problems with the 2 federal and state regulatory authorities. And as somebody who implements and points to regulations on a daily basis and has to write notices of violation, having a citation to the very specific part that needs to be complied with or is in violation of is a lot more helpful to have it split out. Otherwise, we get interpretation, or does it include, was there a comma before this? This makes that absolutely clear. So even if we don't have future regulations, we have a place to cite very specifically for treated or untreated, for ground and for surface.
Yeah, and I was thinking that it seemed kind of obvious the difference between the untreated and treated, but yeah, thanks for that clarification, because I don't read regulations every day. Thank you. That's all of my questions.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Zemlich.
Thank you. And I would just like to echo Commissioner Fry's comments about how much appreciate the work that you clearly put into this. And surprisingly, I still have questions even after all of the excellent questions of the other commissioners. So it sounds like currently, if I'm understanding the NOI process, there's this back and forth, there's requirements, there is the discretion of the agency to deny the NOI. Is that correct? Project?
So thank you for the question, Commissioner Zimlick. At this time, we have not come to that point. Every single entity that has submitted an NOI has worked with us and has acquiesced to our requests and said and submitted revised notices of intent that would allow us to, that have met the threshold for us to say no discharge permit required. But in the event that someone were to not take that path, then That's a very good question. What would happen at that point would most likely be that we would deny that notice of intent. I think that's the best way to say it. Um, yeah, that's a very good question that I'm not sure the department has really explored that dead end. I mean, current in the 1201 notice of intent process, we would send them a discharge permit required letter. Okay, so let's take that path. Discharge permit required letter goes out. Our regulations then say that they cannot receive a discharge permit for this activity until standards are promulgated. And therefore, they would be in a holding pattern until those standards are promulgated.
So to follow up, for example, if the site that you mentioned earlier, this Canales site, if you had gone out and determined that there had been a discharge, would that be a basis for denying future NOIs from that said applicant?
Commissioner Zemlick, I think I can answer that. Under the Water Quality Act, it does state that we can deny a permit if somebody has violated the regulations. If the regulations were in place and said that they needed a permit or that they weren't permitted to discharge, that would be a violation and we would consider that and deny a notice of intent in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Well, maybe not deny the notice of intent, but
it's
not permit the demonstration project.
I mean, it's tricky because of the permit NOI issue. So I'm still also trying to wrap my head around that and sort of follow up, because when you have these projects that are essentially relying on operators that are regulated by different agencies, the question is, for example, if you had an NOI that was submitted with plans to use certain based on the Produced Water Act, you have this chain of custody that is of the water, depending on the operator, the transporter. Is there a mechanism in place to understand if any of those, let's say, transporters who are kind of more under the radar of the Oil Conservation Division, for you to know if there's any existing violations or compliance issues on which to base your decision on the application?
So thank you for the question. And I want to revise, Jenna, I want to do this. So I don't think that we would deny the notice of intent based on that, because the statute in the Water Quality Act specifically says that we would only be able to deny a permit based off of the previous 10 years of actions. And I don't know that we would hold an operator responsible for previous actions if we were then going to follow that up with a response that we do not have regulatory authority over their project by giving them a no discharge permit required letter. And to answer your direct question that you just had, we have this similar problem with septage haulers. Septage haulers are regulated by the liquid waste program in the department through the liquid waste regulations that are promulgated under the Environmental Improvement Board, not the commission. And we work with those groups to stay aware and try to be as proactive as we possibly can. But under the Water Quality Act, we don't generally assert any authority over those types of activities. We do very often refer issues. So if we become aware of something, then, or that someone's participating in a project that we are overseeing, or that we have a plan for transportation that's been submitted with an NOI that identifies a hauler that's a known issue, then we would refer over to OCD or to someone at a different in a different bureau to ensure that they are aware that this person is active and is participating. But we would not take any direct action against that person or that entity.
Okay, and sort of to follow that up, along with the public perception issue, and also a question in my mind is, is this ability to have these demonstration projects and it's not well constrained. And so looking at the existing applications for pilot bench scale projects, it looks like the majority of them were at facilities like Bergendorf or University Lab. And I think the problem arises when you are going to, bench scale testing at a well pad or potentially in some other location. Has there been any consideration by the agency to kind of constrain the facility type that's approvable?
Can Commissioners, I'm like, oh, thank you for the question. As far as the demonstration projects that we've seen to date, there's been a mix of bench scale, which is the ones that are conducted in a closed facility laboratory type of venue, and the pilot projects. So we used to call everything pilot projects. And this rule helps us define and delineate between those that are occurring in a closed facility and those that are occurring at a larger um, kind of field kind of project. We have both. We have both pilot projects and bench scale projects. We are probably more aware of all of the pilot projects, which are those that occur in the field, than those that are occurring currently in as bench scale projects. This would iron out that little nuance of everybody at least letting us know that these are occurring and where they're occurring and what kind of information they're looking for. So it is mixed and we get both.
Yeah, and I left out the Bergendorf and recycling facilities. It seems like those are the predominant ones, and it just seems like the requirements in place at both of those types of facilities is very different than, say, a well pad. Or I guess you could probably see where I'm going with this, is that those are fairly well regulated, well constrained, known places, whereas the ability to do it at a remote location nearby a well pad is problematic. If you are, to follow up on what you said, your reliance on, sort of citizen science and catching problems after they occur, rather than sort of trying to constrain these activities in places that are more protective of, should that occur, there are things in place to mitigate it.
I will. Yeah. So we do have we have a matrix in our existing guidance document for what was previously pilot projects, where we determine whether it's going to be OCD's regulatory authority, NMED's regulatory authority, or a combination of both. And that guides us on how we proceed forward. If it's OCD's jurisdiction, we have an easy answer to that. If it's combined, more complicated. I will say also that our 1201 or 20.6.2 1201 spill regulations still cover all of these projects, and so not reporting to us a failure of the system is a violation. But again, we still consider that to be self-reporting. And your concern is very valid that if it's a NMED jurisdiction project that occurs in the middle of nowhere, 3 hours from civilization on an oil pad, how will we ever hear about it? And I think that's a common risk with most of the activities. It's just exasperated in this situation. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
I do have something to add. For example, if it's on a well pad, they have to file sundry with the OCD, and in that case also, for example, if it's on a well pad, I believe they had to file a sundry with the OCD, and then that was also on BLM land, and so that had to be reviewed by BLM too. So there seemed to be a couple layers of review.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of mention of standards and data. And I took a look at WaterStar, and I've seen this data evolve over the last decade and a half, maybe. And I was a little underwhelmed by what's there. I understand the businesses wanting to protect proprietary information, but it seems like at a township range level, you should be able to report more than what currently exists in the USGS database. And this is kind of speaks to a couple of things, like the timelines that Commissioner McWilliams mentioned, and the need for this information. Will this rule and will the reporting requirements be enforceable for quality, and how do you envision that being disseminated?
Commissioner Zemlik, I'll start and then I will probably hand it over to Ms. Murphy. This rule requires the demonstration projects, whether they be bench scale or they be pilot projects, to submit their data at the conclusion of their demonstration project as they outlined in their NOI. That data, if it were to be codified, or that requirement, if it were to be codified, would be enforceable. And that will help us get past this bump, if you would say. We have, and I'll have Ms. Murphy talk about the demonstration projects that have been submitted to date and the lack of follow through on those end reports, and using the guidance that the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium worked very hard to put in place. And so it is the hope that codification of this rule would allow us to have that data so that we can start developing those regulations as the Water Quality Act requires. I would like Ms. Murphy to talk about the substance of the 7 demonstration projects that have been provided to NMED to date and where they are, just real briefly, of where they are in the process.
So there are 7 demonstration projects, and we're not necessarily clear how active they are, or if they're active. And so the bigger issue here is we're not in charge of WaterStar. That's the consortium. And there is some data that could be put into WaterStar, and that would be useful. And the data that's in there right now is mostly the USGS produced waters and the GOTEC, and that's field data. And so we want it to begin. We have, I think, 3 to 4 data sets, and they're not exhaustive. And we would like to see them put in WaterStar, but we're not in charge of WaterStar.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you asking about historically or implementation? The data, about the data.
Implementation, really, because
Okay.
it looked to me like it was repackaged existing legacy data rather than new information. And as far as implementation, is it necessary? If it's enforceable through this rule that this data is reported, that does answer that question. And follow-up question would be, what are additional incentives to populating that database, so that it's a little bit more robust, because that seems to be the hurdle for many of us in understanding how you could even project rulemaking in the future without that information.
Thank you for the question. The department has grappled with um, databases over the last 20 years, and water data, as we currently are participating in any aspect that we can with the Water Data Act, and making sure that we're compliant and sharing everything. And I will say that it was, as far as I've been involved with discussions, the intention was to make that data absolutely public in any way that we can. And that would most likely include GIS layers on our NMED mapper, as well as making sure that it gets shared into the WaterStar database. Um, I think the department's intention is to be as transparent and as open and as public about this process as we possibly can be. But we don't have anything cemented in place as the method for that.
Okay, thank you. And another question about the data. So reading through all of the exhibits, and I don't know if it was Ms. Murphy's written testimony or if it was just reading about WaterStar, and then some testimony earlier that, so for any potential reuse, this data would have to all be public. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay, but currently WaterStar is set up like in a tiered system where really all of the data is really would be only available to regulators and maybe academia under some circumstances.
There's 4 tiers of data, and the first 2 are public, and I listed in there, and it's some of the more basic data. And so tier 1 and 2 will be available to the public, and tier 3 and 4 are available to research and academia. And that's listed in my testimony. And if you'd like me to find it and read it, that's fine too. But that's tiers 3 and 4 are like radium, proprietary chemicals, a lot of other compounds. And that tier system is set up by the consortium. It's not set up by us.
And the department would not utilize WaterStar as our only methodology. We would share it with that. I just don't anticipate that being even our primary place to store the data. That hopefully our new permitting database would allow us to move through the NOI process and have these somehow entered into there. And so it'd be in a format that could be utilized by anyone who is wanting to utilize it or to view it.
And Ms. Murphy, this question is directed to you. Do you know how well that tier 4 data is, how well populated that is currently?
It's not.
It's not.
Not even from the horizontal wells, there's been no data submitted. And so the data that's in there is legacy data. You're right. It's from the USGS produced waters database or the New Mexico Tech Octane. So there is no data in there that's in the 4-tiered system.
Okay, thank you. And I think this is my last question. I reviewed the guidelines from the Produced Water Research Consortium and the existing demonstration projects, and it looks like many of them have accompanying documentation from the consortium. But the review process as it happens with the consortium, there's not a robust sort of review, and I don't by panelists or information on who was part of the process, how long it took, if there were comments. And I wonder if if the agency has considered, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Hightower, having that information available so that the public can review if there were any concerns by the consortium. I know the comments from the agency are generally in there, written ones.
We had the same concerns. What process do proponents that want to create a demonstration project, what do they go through with a consortium? And is it geared towards research? Does it have a good end product? Are they going to be taking samples appropriately? Are they processing those samples appropriately? So we have those same concerns, but as the department, we would accept a demonstration project regardless of affiliation with the consortium. And so we've somewhat let go of that. Our process would be the NOI process for anyone that is in or is not in a consortium. And so I do think that your question is most likely better answered by Mr. Hightower.
So to follow up on that, and maybe this is a question for Dr. Hu, is in those demonstration projects, do you find that you have the sufficient information on the treatment processes proposed in all cases, or have there been back and forth with applicants? I'm sort of getting at the proprietary nature of some of these projects. In your experience reviewing these, has that information been sufficient for any determinations that you would make?
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, I didn't participate in any demonstration project in the consortium, but I did some research. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I did not participate in any producer water demonstration project in the consortium, but I did some producer water research during my PhD. So, I can not make a conclusion to say which treatment technologies is effective for producer water from unconventional well. There are a lot of challenges associated with current treatment technologies for the producer water from unconventional wells. That's my answer.
Thank you.
And I would add, the company makes the determination. They propose. We're not there to give input on what treatments they use. We're just there to say, we would like you to thoroughly characterize the raw produced water, run it through your treatment, and then test the efficacy of the treatment by thoroughly characterizing the treated produced water.
And of the 7 kind of active, to some extent, projects that are currently happening, are those 2 things, those 2 characterizations? I know they have to submit it at the end, but are you familiar with what the status is on any of them?
So they say in their application that they will test according to the consortium guidelines, and the consortium is mostly in charge of bringing those projects and setting them up and talking to people and telling them what's required. I mean, we have to keep a little bit of a wall between We're the regulators. We don't tell people what to do.
Right. I just mean if any of the projects, if they have concluded, if that pre and post quality data has been consistently reported to you.
So the only project that we have that has been completed is the Canales project. That was not completed under notice of intent process. That was previous to the current way we're doing things. They did do pre and post. We have not received the official final report with that data in our hot little hands as of yet, and we do have concerns about chain of custody on the samples, as well as some other aspects of it. So I think the direct answer to your question is no.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Thank you. So let me ask if the commissioners in the room, some of whom asked questions yesterday and some today, that includes Commissioner Vihil, Commissioner Brankard, Commissioner Patton, Chair Thompson, Vice Chair Armstrong, Commissioners McWilliams, Dominguez, Fry, and Zemlik, whether those of you present have other questions. Chair Thompson.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and the panel as well. We've sort of forgotten that this is a water reuse reg, and I'd like to focus on municipal. I prefer the term municipal water as opposed to domestic. I think of domestic as what's coming from a household, whereas a domestic is municipal is coming from the entire sewer shed, which may include, well, will include lots of non-household waste. But it seems to me that there is a very strong need for municipal wastewater reuse regs, and there have been at least one DPR project that has been constructed at Cloudcroft. There are a number of others that have been proposed and seem to me have a likely chance of going through. We've talked about 95 reuse projects. These are all, I think, for irrigation and non-potable use. The department has done at least 2 studies. They funded one for an external organization, the National Water Research Institute out of California. And then there was an internal review panel that worked on this 12, 15 years ago. Domestic or municipal wastewater reuse is an important part of the 50-year water plan. Other states, notably California, have very well-developed DPR regulations. I want to know, why isn't that included in this proposed rule? First of all, let me ask a simple question. Do you all agree with my assertion that it is a very important aspect of our water cycle and that we do need wastewater reuse regs?
I agree.
And so now let me ask the response. Why isn't that part of this rule?
Chair Thompson, I believe I address at least some of this in both my direct and then my rebuttal testimony. There were some questions from other parties to this matter regarding having an all comprehensive reuse rule and why did we do this in a broken up method. And recalling from the top of my head how my testimony responded, there's several reasons. And the first is the fact that our domestic, and I'm going to continue to use domestic
Sure.
simply because
That's
for
what's-
prominent, and we don't just have municipalities, we also have smaller facilities that are strictly domestic. So I kind of lean towards that. There is a recognition that there are other sources in a larger municipality, though. As far as domestic wastewater reuse goes, we have the ability and we have been permitting it under 20.6.2 NMAC. And so each individual applicant who wants to treat domestic wastewater, it's been characterized to be domestic wastewater or predominantly domestic with pretreatment stuff. They can come in for an application and we can issue a discharge permit. And we have been doing that for well over 20 years now. The fact of the matter is this will not directly impact doing the rule now versus doing the rule in a couple of years for the domestic wastewater portion of this will not directly impact the permittees the same way that the produced water portion of this does. And so we can keep our domestic wastewater, and to some extent, we have a few industrial wastewater sources that treat and reuse. We can keep those under the current guidelines, which are for domestic wastewater reuse. That's all they cover is domestic wastewater reuse under our 2007 guidelines. However, for produced water, as everybody has testified here today, the notice of intent process, as it's written in 20.6.2, says that an entity, if they want to discharge, needs to submit a notice of intent. We are asking that the commission consider this rule that all demonstration projects with produced water do submit a notice of intent so that we can start gathering the information needed to determine whether this wastewater can be characterized, if it can be treated, and if there are any applicable reuses for it. So there's that nuance with it. That is time sensitive. There are demonstration projects going on, and I have staff that review these demonstration project NOIs and spend a good amount of their time with the back and forth trying to get the information we need to make these determinations based on a rule that doesn't necessarily require it to be submitted. So if somebody were doing a non-discharge of produced water and they read the current rule, it doesn't require them to submit to us. We work with the consortium and we encourage them to give us the notice of intent. But that's where the time sensitivity is and the information that's needed. The NOI process that we've outlined here for produced water are the elements that we run into most, and the amount that we spend time with these demonstration project entities. And really, it's not fair to the entity to keep going back and forth and asking for this piece of information to confirm this and to redesign that. We're hoping that this makes that process smooth, streamlined, consistent, and encourages the research to occur. Whereas right now, we're really just trying to fit it into existing regulations that weren't never intended to manage a waste stream of this type.
Thank you.
Can
And I appreciate the timeliness or the time sensitivity of a reg for produce water, but the department's been working on, first of all, let me ask, are the 2007 guidelines, it's been a long time since I looked at them. They were only for non-potable reuse.
Correct.
So when communities like Albuquerque, the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority is envisioning a DPR project, but without regulations,
We're at a
they
loss.
have no guidance on what needs to be designed. And it, so I think there's timeliness for this. Let me ask another question, and this panel may not know, but has the Cloudcroft DPR program been permitted to go into operation?
Okay, Commissioner, thank you, Chair Thompson. So I want to add some elucidation to the previous question as well as answer your question directly, if that's okay.
Sure.
Currently, we're on the fast track for DPR regulations. We have previously lacked the resources to undertake it as a regulatory development project. We received special funding from the legislature to advance reuse in New Mexico, and we have put a portion of that money towards a contract with ERG to develop those regulations. And we've been meeting with them weekly, and we're somewhat part of the way through the process. We've scoped out the Arizona regulations on DPR, the Colorado regulations on DPR, and the California regulations, and we've started picking and choosing on where we want to land on those, on our regulations. I have been given a mandate by my management to have that done by the end of the year, which is fairly quick. So I wanted to set your mind at ease. That's in the process. And we are currently working on it, and we're going to include in that above ground non-potable reuse regulations that will also codify the guidance document from 2007 into regulation. I think I've forgotten your second question.
So that is only for non-potable though.
So no, that is going to be direct, indirect potable reuse as well as non-potable reuse. It'll be shoved into this supplemental rule, and it will accompany the produced water section of this rule in perpetuity, hopefully. And so Cloudcroft specifically recently, from my understanding, has wavered on their intentions. There's a cross connection in the department between the Drinking Water Bureau and Groundwater Quality Bureau and Surface Water Quality Bureau, between who has authority, what it transfers authority. And then a recent federal decision essentially made Cloudcroft's NPDES permit go away because they're in a closed basin. And therefore, the Groundwater Quality Bureau has picked up the permitting process. And so we are in the process of permitting them for a groundwater discharge permit. And I believe that they are not intending to do DPR at this time due to size and constraints on the site, as well as some of the requirements that were placed upon them by the Drinking Water Bureau. Right now, I will say that our motivating factor for DPR is the city of Las Vegas, who, after the recent fires, realized that their water supply was very limited in those instances and therefore are working to diversify their water portfolio in creative ways. And the feasibility study portion of this regulation is really intended to give them the comfort that they need in order to accomplish the studies that they need to do to figure out whether they want to do ozone, biologically activated carbon, or IPR versus DPR, or if they will have to go to reverse osmosis.
Thank you. That's encouraging. Yeah, I'll just repeat myself by saying, I think these regulations are as timely as the produce water regulations, and I think they probably affect a lot more people. So I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. We'll expect to see something by the end of the year. Thank you.
Okay. Other commissioners in the room? Any additional questions? Commissioner Sky?
Thank you. I think coming from a university background, having been on safety committees, having a lab where safety is a constant concern, I think you can understand where I'm coming from with these questions about the handling of the materials, in particular in university laboratories, especially knowing that, we need more data, and encouraging all universities in the state and colleges to participate in this kind of research is important, not just for adding to the data, but creating a workforce that's going to continue to address this. So if you receive a DOI from a university that doesn't have the benefit of, the larger research universities of having good support staff that help them know, okay, these are the regulations you have to think about. Is there a way that, this is gray area again, I'm a little at a loss to how to ask this question, but like, say there's a university, say Eastern New Mexico University or CNM or Santa Fe Community College, they want to do this kind of research. is there a way for you guys to, with the DOIs, to really empower them to do this work?
Thank you, Commissioner Fry. I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Do you mean NOI instead of DOI?
Oh, I'm sorry, NOI,
Okay.
yes.
Madam Hearing Officer, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Fry, in regards to helping with, can you state the question? Because now that I got clarification, I forgot what the question is.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to it too. So I've seen enough in my career that I know that how we receive the materials, how they're transported to get to us, how we dispose of them, it's very important questions for these researchers to ask. In the NOI process, how can you best help these universities that don't have the benefit the larger universities?
So I think one of the benefits in NMED is that there are different agencies that have different regulations. And so while sometimes that means we're siloed, it also means we talk to each other a lot. And so in regards to, um, transportation, we ask them that they need to have some type of, plan for the handling. And so, like for worker safety, the Occupational Health and Safety Bureau has an entire voluntary compliance program that we can refer someone to. And that's what they do all day. They go around the state to different industries, agencies, and walk them through how they stand up an appropriate health and safety program to protect the workers. In regards to some of the transportation, like we have the Radiation Control Bureau that can walk them through things. Um, we have people across the agency that we can put them in contact to walk them through, like, do you need a permit? Do you need this? Here we have guidance documents. So that's one of the things we can offer.
And I'll just use an example from our current permitting process. We often go into communities to the wastewater treatment plant and they express to us a lack of funding. There's no mandate in our regulations that we have to refer them to the Construction Programs Bureau and the Clean Water Revolving Act, but we want them to succeed. And so we take the time to either set up a conference call or provide them with information necessary so that they can go and either get a grant or get a loan from the Construction Programs Bureau. So I think the official answer to your question is we don't have the authority to require them to do that, but we have the intention and the forethought. If we go out to a site for remediation of soil and we see that they've excavated well below 6 feet and there's people just working in there willy-nilly, we will either refer them directly to OSHA or we will do the referral ourselves and make sure that OSHA is aware of the issue. So I think we automatically already do what your question is asking. It's just not an official capacity. We just see it as our jobs anyway.
That's kind of what I assumed, but it's nice to hear you guys talk about that. Thank you.
Right. It's noon, and if we're going to take an hour for lunch, we need to do that now because we have public comment noticed up at 1. Let me talk about that for a moment. We do have at least 7 or 8 commenters already signed up for the 1 o'clock public comment session. And then I would like council and parties to know that there are a couple of motions that just need to be ruled on before the parties cross-examine the department panel. So we will take that up and I will ask you for your positions. Again, that comes after public comment. And then we'll begin the party cross-examination of the department panel. And although there was a request to maybe move that table, I have a better idea. I'm going to go sit up by the chair and ask cross-examiners to sit at this end of the dais. Otherwise, the panel is facing directly away from me and the court reporter, and that doesn't work. So let's come back at 1 and we'll take things in that order.
I think we should be good now. Okay, excuse me. Thank you. All right. Hey, Donna, so how do you find everything? What do you need to do to improve this thing?
For the system. They don't give you the money until you're done. So.
Yeah, okay, because I looked at it, I have to do everything online. but I'm not doing it.